All right. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. It is episode 2 of the Daily Type podcast. It is my first episode I'm hosting, so bear with me. If anything goes funny, just let me know. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land in which we gather on is the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And that's a super important piece of this project for all of us. So I hope that we take that as we continue on this interview. So the first thing I'd like to ask both of you is if you could tell us your name, your current career, and how environmental justice has shaped your career path so far. Just give your background, how you've gotten to where you are today. Yeah.
My name is Rachel Lewis. I am a master's student right now in environmental sciences with the University of Guelph. I'm really passionate about soil science specifically and soil and water conservation.
So my background is in environmental research. I recently finished up my degree from the University of Toronto in ecology, evolutionary biology, and neuroscience. And throughout that degree and kind of beyond the last year, I've been doing various forms of ecological research. I think what motivated me to get into the environmental sector was environmental justice and the call for climate change literacy globally. I think that answers both of your questions, right?
The next thing I'd like to ask you is, what do you find most fulfilling about your roles in your career, your degree, or your roles as being delegates also? Any way you'd like to answer that?
I find it really fulfilling to actually be able to take action. Like with my master's project, I'm able to actually work out in the field, and it's really fulfilling to be able to work with multiple different organizations, like government, non-government organizations, because they all have, different opinions. So it's nice to try and get people on the same page about making environmental change.
It's a similar thing for me as well with being in environmental research. Every organism that I've worked with, most recently turtles, has really shed, a microcosmic light on issues related to climate change and global warming, and has provided me with a deeper understanding of it. And it's been incredibly empowering and inspiring to be surrounded by other people that prioritize that so much in their lives.
And what do you find most challenging about these roles that you've had within these sectors?
It's sometimes challenging to work with some companies or organizations that don't really want to adopt new environmental practices. For example, I've worked with oil and gas a bit, and they just kind of don't want to really do as much for the environment as they should. And it can be really frustrating when you're showing these companies that work needs to be done, but they're just kind of yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that. And you're like, no, you need to do it now. We need to meet these targets. So yeah, that can be frustrating.
And kind of in a similar vein to that, as an individual that's a budding conservation professional, I'm very aware that what Rachel is dealing with is a lot of what my future in the environmental career world will look like. Anybody that's entering the environmental sector knows that it's a little bit of an uphill battle. Maybe not even a little bit, maybe just an uphill battle. Yeah.
And you both have pursued these roles and worked so tirelessly and so hard for environmental justice. What would you say are the biggest factors in your success?
I think I wouldn't be successful if I didn't have people that supported me and encouraged me to keep going. I think it's really important to have coworkers, managers, supervisors who can continue to encourage you to keep going. You feel like you're not making a difference, but you are making a difference. And it's really important to be surrounded by people like that.
Yeah, similarly here, my like friends, family, colleagues, they've all played a pretty instrumental role in encouraging success in that. And I also just think the general atmosphere around the environmental sector right now, like I think there's a real public sense of urgency that has also encouraged success in this field, whereas like 30 years ago, it might have been a lot more difficult.
How about in terms of your journey with environmental justice, in career, or in just other projects you've had volunteer? What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I guess find a specific issue in the environmental sector that you're really passionate about, and make the connections that will help you succeed, and just don't give up. It won't be easy, but don't give up.
I think that one of the best pieces of advice I got as I was like getting into research in particular was to focus a lot less on products at the end. So like focus less on, a publication or like a tangible accomplishment at the end, and focus more on like the journey, like developing the skills and mindset that will make you a good environmental professional. All the rest, like all the publications, etc., those will come naturally once you've developed, a strong foundation.
Yeah, definitely. I really admire that approach. That's awesome. Have there been any big learning points, or as many of us would see them as failures, even though I know that there's lots of growth that happens from that? What have you learned from those times that things haven't gone exactly as you'd like them to? Yeah.
I think that research never goes exactly the way that you want it to. And so at the beginning, when you're first getting into that can be like really discouraging. You're like, why am I not getting the results that I should be getting? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? But like over time, you learn to be able to adapt and say, okay, this is how the data looks. So where are we going to go from here? Like you have to keep going forward.
Yeah, I feel like research is like 85% failure and learning how to acclimatize to failure. And which is a really, really, I think, important skill set. And like, I think that was a huge adjustment I had to make when I got into research. It rarely ever goes according to plan. And when it does, that's when something magical really happens. And when it doesn't, you, again, develop like a very valuable skill set to, manage when things don't go quite the way we want. Yeah.
And I'm really interested, what are you currently working on within your studies or outside them as well?
So for me, with my studies, the project I'm working on is a type of regenerative agriculture practice. So I'm working in potato production fields, and the farming method is controlled traffic farming. So what that means is that the farming equipment drives on very specific, basically their tracks within the farming field. And so the purpose of that is so that the rest of the soil in the field will not be as compacted. So this will end up having better physical soil properties. So you'll definitely notice a difference in like how much water you will need for the soil. And like that's a big deal. You won't need to till it, hopefully. So
Wow.
yeah, definitely better for the soil long term. So it's an interesting study. I'm excited about it.
Very cool project, Rachel. I'm excited to hear how it goes. I've been researching for the last few years, turtle sensory organs, in particular, an organ called barbels. So these are, little bumps under often like the chins and necks of turtles. They haven't really been studied in depth since the early 80s. And so I picked up this project, and I've been studying both the morphology and ultrastructure of these organs, but more specifically the evolutionary biology. How and when did these organs evolve? So a lot of it has been generating a data set of over 300 species of turtles and different ecological factors, being like diet and habitat and like different behaviors, and linking that to barbel presence or absence, and trying to see if we can infer function from that. So that has been a big part of my life in the last, I guess, maybe 2.5 years now.
Amazing. How many turtles are native to Canada? Like you said, 300.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh.
It's a lot. That's some good trivia. I can feel my supervisor's gonna be disappointed if I'm wrong right now. I honestly couldn't tell you. I know in Ontario, I think there are 3 or 4. I don't know about the entirety of the country, and I'm not going to guess because it won't be a good thing.
All good. That's awesome. Do you guys have any tips for high school students, especially because that's what youth to see at this point entails? And there's a lot of people that would love to go into studies that resemble yours too. What are your biggest tips for pursuing careers in marine biology or just in environmental activism in general? Yeah.
As a high school student, I had no idea I'd be where I am today. So I say, don't worry about the long-term path, just take it like year by year. I didn't even know what I wanted to do in my undergrad and university until my last semester of grade 12. So it's okay that you don't have it all figured out. I would say, try and maybe get some volunteer experience. If you want to go into the environmental sector, maybe look into some opportunities that are in your area that you could get involved with and see if those are a good fit for you. Maybe you decide that this is not for you, and like that's okay. That's good. That it shows that that's not the path for you, and then try something else.
Definitely. That's great advice. Yeah, I think a lot of people, I'm in grade 12 right now and it's application season. So a lot of my friends are just kind of paralyzed in the amount of choice we have for the first time ever. So that's really helpful. Just, yeah, even if it's not the right thing, you're learning still, right? And you're learning that it's not for you. So awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of think that our undergraduate degrees are kind of viewed as this fixed thing that once you decide what you're doing at the beginning of your degree, you can't possibly change it. You've committed to it. But the reality is you choose your career then when you're 17 or 18, and you don't have to stick to that your entire degree. I had no idea I was entering the environmental sector at all. I was very pre-med centric until my second year of university. And I had some sort of epiphany working in a bee lab in the basement of a lab building at U of T, that I did not want to be a neurosurgeon, that I wanted to be an environmental researcher and scientist. And I changed my major that day. And here I am. And I still have a long way to go, but I think my biggest advice is to really trust your gut, whatever you decide to pursue. It's not fixed. You're going to change and develop and evolve so much throughout your degree that the thing that you choose at the beginning of it might not be what you want to do by the end of it. And I really encourage having a sense of openness to that process, that, if you realize halfway through your degree, like I did, that this isn't the path you want to pursue, then listen to that, because you'll be a lot happier for it long term.
That's really awesome to hear. I love that the underground bees are what caused
Yeah.
Did you have a moment like that? It was like, this is what I want to do, this is for me, or was it kind of just evolved over time?
It kind of evolved over time for me, at least. I wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. I had wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid, and I got into university and I was super jazzed about that. And I became friends with a girl that was doing research at the Algonquin Wildlife Research Station. And we were both just volunteering in the same lab. I was just volunteering to get, lab volunteer hours with a professor that does research with bees. I was just cutting like lily seeds in the basement of a U of T lab building for this lab. And she was just telling me about her experience at that research station. And I just kind of realized, like, I've always been really connected to the natural world and being outdoors. And while she was talking to me about it for probably like the 13th time, I was just like, I don't want to be inside doing work forever. I would like to be outside, and I want to be connected to nature and trying to do anything I can to preserve it because it's so important right now. So yeah, that was kind of like, I had a realization at that point that this is what I want to pursue. And I kept my neuroscience major, but I switched my other major into ecology and evolutionary biology.
Wow, that must have been quite the heavy load for you.
Oh yeah, I love my degree. I love school, but I was like very excited to not be in it after I was done.
Yeah, that's impressive that you kept both those up. That's really admirable. What about you, Rachel? Was there a point that you decided that this was the path you wanted to go down, or did it more an evolution over time?
So I guess when I started my undergrad at Acadia, I was in geology, and I was in the co-op program, and after I did my first co-op with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, I became really passionate and interested by soil science. And so there isn't an actual soil science program at Acadia. So I decided to do a double major in geology and environmental science because I felt like I was getting more of the soil and the environment, that was more important than learning about igneous and metamorphic rocks to soil. So yeah, it's totally normal and totally okay to go to university and change your mind. I mean, you could do a double major like Danté and I both did, or completely switch into a whole different program. It's normal to even decide that the university you chose is not the right fit for you, and you can go across the country and go to another university. I think it's just as important to find a program that's right for you as it is to find a university and a community that's right for you.
Yeah, and how did the two of you decide what university was right for you and what program? I know that changed over time, but what initially drew you to the programs you enrolled in?
So, like I had said earlier, I didn't know what I was going to take in university until my last semester of grade 12. I actually just happened to take geology as a science elective. I can't even remember what I was originally going to be taking in university. It was not geology, but I took a geology course in high school and I was like, I really like this. And so that is what I ended up applying to. And my parents and my family are in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. And so I wanted to stay close to home. And so that's why I chose Acadia University to go to.
The Annapolis Valley, I've heard so much about it. My friend was living there for the last year. It sounds beautiful.
So pretty.
I can understand wanting to stay close to home if that's your home. Yeah, for me, so I chose to go to the University of Toronto. A little bit of it was a gut feeling, to be honest. When I got I was accepted to each of the universities I applied to. But when I got the acceptance from U of T, I just felt it, that it was the right choice. And I was like, I'm going to go here. I think it was also, I came from the Kawartha Lakes of Ontario, which is where I grew up, which is a very beautiful area. Also, it provided a lot of my appreciation of nature and, the environment, but I didn't want to stay in that area for my undergrad. And so I wanted to have a radical change, for better or for worse. And it's been an adventure. So I moved to Toronto for school. So the city was a big part of why I wanted to move. Yeah, and the specific program. So when I started my undergrad, I've always been really interested in neuroscience and human biology, especially because I thought, at the time I'm going to be a doctor. So I took neuroscience, and then I'm a very interdisciplinary person, which also maybe I have a lack of decision-making abilities. So I decided to double minor in Buddhism, mental health, and psychology, and French as a second language, just to really mix things up. And I love them both, but when I discovered ecology, I had to kind of make a call and had to drop those 2 minors. Yeah, so really, I feel like most people that I know, the things that they started majoring and minoring in, there was such a big shift by second or third year. And I kind of just want to reiterate what Rachel was saying too, where it's like, not only can you change up the decisions of, what universities to go to, but a big thing I would emphasize is also don't underrate the value of like college programs in the environmental sector. University is great. It provides a lot more limited hands-on experience than college programs. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I wish I had a bit more of an open mind to that when I started my degree, but that's just something to food for thought.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. The next question I'd like to ask both of you is, have you seen the impacts of climate change on your research? Have you seen a difference in what you would have expected to see, the kind of data you're collecting? Or is anything that is affected by climate change seen through your research?
So for me and my specific project that I'm on right now, I just started it in September, so I don't really have like the time frame to really comment on that specifically. I do know like here in Atlantic Canada, like it's changing as to like when it gets cold and like how long it'll be warm for. Like for example, like just talking to the people I work with, like we're trying to get as much field work in as we can right now before it snows. And like, some of them are like, oh, like I remember last year, last Thanksgiving, it had snowed already where I was living, and like it's still like pretty warm here. So yeah, it's really hard in agriculture because it's really dependent on like the weather and the temperature. And so like, yeah, you definitely notice that the climate is changing for sure.
For me, it's the climate change hasn't necessarily impacted, the duration of any of my projects, but they've definitely, I've learned a lot about how climate change impacts different organisms. So I haven't specifically studied the impacts of climate change on turtles, but because I've had to study over 300 species of turtles to a small degree, like I'm a little bit of a turtle generalist just because I've had to look into certain factors for each of these turtles. I think one of the things that has really struck me is like how much globally how turtles are impacted by climate change. In particular, like turtles have temperature dependent sex determination. So when they, lay their eggs, what determines the gender of the hatchlings is actually the temperature that their like nest is. Oh, so that's something that is actually a big problem with climate change.
Yeah.
Just because, you're only going to get one gender. And then that limits the potential of future generations. So, and just in general, like with climate change and beyond just climate change, there's like pollution heavily impacts freshwater turtles, marine turtles. I think we've like all seen articles about that. So again, turtles are kind of an example of just one of many different animals that are, very much impacted by climate change. So yeah, not specific to, my particular project, but just something I've become more acutely aware of as I've researched turtles.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had no idea that temperature determines sex. That's really interesting. How about, do you have any big tips for people listening to the podcast, what they can do to kind of help mitigate the impacts of climate change, especially on your fields?
I mean, fossil fuels are a huge contribution to climate change. So, I mean, drive less when you can, be aware of what companies you're purchasing from, like who you're supporting. I think that's really important.
Yeah, maintaining just a general sense of literacy about, the trickling effects of climate change, not just the effects of climate change, but what is like the source effects. So a lot of that is connected to, giant corporations that have a really high fossil fuel output. Personal decision making has a relatively small impact on global warming and climate change, which is, it makes us all feel pretty helpless. But I guess honestly, attending this World Conservation Congress provided a lot of insight to that question.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love if you could both talk a little bit about your experience there. We're all super interested at UC to hear about that. Yeah.
I feel like I attended quite a few different sessions on, like, it was great because there's just so many different like environmental areas that were covered, like everything from like lakes, freshwater, to oceans, to landscapes, to climate change. And it was just like so much information. And I feel like I've spent a lot of time learning about like different conservation activities that happen within Canada, and I definitely learned a lot more about like some of the global issues that I really didn't know about at all, like how important mangroves are. Like I just feel like I learned so much more about conservation throughout the world, which is completely different than just like here in Canada. Like there's just so much more going on out there that we don't even really think about in our own backyards.
Yeah. What would you say was the most eye-opening thing you learned from looking at it from a global perspective? Was there anything that really has like sat with you since then?
I just feel like the conference as a whole was just really like encouraging, and like it was just really like nice to see all of these different like scientists working on completely different environments, just making changes throughout the world like that. It just like really gave me a lot of hope, I guess.
Yeah, I found it incredibly empowering, and like a kind of a word that keeps on popping up in my head is just the interconnectivity of environmental issues across the globe, which I mean, similar to what Rachel said, I think it's really easy when you're in the environmental sector in Canada to be quite, Canada centric in our focus, but I think it was really interesting just seeing how variable different environmental conservation efforts are around the globe, but still how there's this like general underlying connected cause to preserve, biodiversity and mitigate climate change. And yeah, I think it inspired me to really open up my scope of what I, read about on a daily basis related to environmental preservation.
Do you have any resources you recommend that have been introduced to you recently, or things you keep coming back to that you feel are really good places to find this kind of information?
I guess like different journals, like, so I mean, this is more maybe at the university level, but I mean, it's never too early to start, but you can sign up for memberships for different like ecological or environmental or conservation based journals. And so, sign up for memberships that are not exclusively just Canadian journals, so that you get journals sent to you from around the globe or North America, even like American journals. Also just like I have different news apps, and you can actually select regions around the world with that. They like which information from different regions you want to be exposed to. So I've been making like an active effort to not just focus on North America, and expand that to different regions. So those are just like some ways. A lot of it is just like attending things like the World Conservation Congress, going to webinars based in different countries. Yeah.
Do you have, either of you have an example or something that really you had no idea about that other countries or definitely other ecosystems have been facing because of climate change that we just don't see in Canada?
I guess it's kind of interesting to see how like developing world countries are dealing with like conservation issues versus like countries like Canada.
Mm-hmm.
There is definitely like maybe more of a struggle to get support, to see it as something significant.
Yeah, and I attended one session on, it was called Realigning Economy and Conservation. So it was basically linking finance to conservation and biodiversity causes. And I was like really surprised the difference between like Canada, which I think we're starting to inch toward. I wish at a faster rate, but we're starting to inch toward more legislation that prioritizes climate change and biodiversity loss. But I mean, in other countries, so like in this particular session, they had a number of like financial representatives or executives from different, financial groups or banks from Europe. And they discussed how like a huge platform of like a huge platform that they're changing within their financial system is prioritizing climate change, not only climate change but biodiversity loss, because they're inextricably linked. And it was encouraging to see that, because I feel like everything feels so frozen in Canada, or that it's like moving at a very slow rate toward environmental preservation on a governmental level. So yeah, that was nicely surprising that the rest of the world is, moving at a faster rate, which might encourage Canada to do the same slowly, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. What would you recommend for people who want to make a difference on the legislative level? Have you been involved in anything that is advocating on that kind of level?
I think research as a whole kind of legitimizes data that can be used to make environmental legislation happen. Environmental legislation just doesn't happen without a cause that is legitimized in some way. So research as a whole does that. But I haven't personally, like on an individual level, been involved with anything related to environmental law. I've been like interested in the prospect of environmental law, maybe one day in the future. I'm still, healing from my undergraduate experience. So I need to give that a few years before I really give that more thought. But yeah, I'm pretty limited in my experience with that. I don't know about Rachel, but.
I kind of have a little bit of experience with like environmental law in like the oil and gas sector, just trying to improve the like monitoring and measurement requirements of detecting gas emissions. And it is challenging, because to change those laws, it means that the oil and gas companies will have to put in more work, and they will probably end up reporting that they are emitting more than they were reporting before by using, not as good methods of measuring gases. So it's hard for companies to want to say that, yeah, we support these laws, when it is gonna make them look worse.
Right.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
it sounds like a lot of working around optics, eh?
yeah, pretty much. So that's why it's important to, I guess, get the public aware and behind these ideas, because like if everybody else wants this done, well then they're going to feel obligated to make these changes. So
Exactly.
individual voices do count, even
Yeah.
though sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
How did you guys get involved in this conference?
So I'm an Ocean Bridge ambassador, and I saw it posted in one of like our forum channels, and so I had just moved to Fredericton, like that, like pretty much right before the conference started. So I was like, okay, like I have some unpacking to do. If I attend this conference, I can like do some unpacking, watch some sessions, go back to doing some unpacking. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna apply to attend it. So
It was a similar avenue for me. So I'm a member of I'm an Ocean Bridge Direct Action Ambassador. So the Direct Action program is a relatively new program uh, from OceanWise, where you basically do a 3-month placement with a partner organization, and then reflect on your experience and try to develop as a budding environmental professional. So I saw that posted on I saw a similar post on the forum, and it was the day before the deadline. And I was like, this seems like a really cool opportunity. And the IUCN, which is the organization that runs the World Conservation Congress, they informed a lot of the research that I did on turtles. They're a really important conservation body and fund a lot of important research. So I thought it would just be really interesting to see what's going on with them as like, a political body to some extent as well. And also just to understand what's going on globally. I think I recognize that I have a Canada-centric scope of conservation, and I wanted to see what else is going on in the world.
Do you guys want to talk a little bit about your roles with OceanWise and with Ocean Bridge? You're both a part of that, right? Yeah.
yeah, so I'm in the Ocean Bridge Ambassador program. I think that started in May, I want to say. I don't know. Time is a weird construct to me sometimes. I think it's like maybe it's 10 or 11 month program. And it's you focus on taking action projects that are related to oceans or waterways within your communities. And there's also some learning journeys as well, where you can get together with other people within your cohort. So where I live in Fredericton, I'm a part of the Atlantic cohort. And I recently participated in the rural or urban journey, which was in September. And so we got to do like a litter cleanup. We learned a lot about different like water issues in Nova Scotia. And we have another urban learning journey in February, and we will be going to St. John's in Newfoundland, and we will be still deciding on what projects we're going to be working on when we're there, but it'll be like a 5-day learning journey, and we'll be doing some action within the community there while we're there. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
I love to hear about that. We're with Youth to See, and we've been really enjoying everything they've been giving us. The other day, we went to the Cheakamus Center in Squamish, and it was so beautiful. We learned about Indigenous ethnobotany, and I had never gone on a walk like that. We went in a longhouse, so there's been a lot of really amazing experiences that they've offered us. So that's really cool. How has your research, or rather, what do you enjoy most about your research roles?
Well, I guess it's nice to be a master's student because I'm just starting right now, so I'm not really fully in charge of my project as I'm learning. But by the end of my degree, the project will be mine. It'll be my responsibility to create a plan to what data I want, how I'm going to collect it. So it's nice to be guided up to the point where I can take control of the research that I'm doing.
Yeah, I think what I like the most about research, I like the fact that it's a very challenging process and that it's not a linear path. Often it's been something where things don't go according to plan and you have to change course or adjust something. And so I think that it's been just really enjoyable learning how to problem solve like that. And yeah, I think it's a valuable thing to have, egos checked and that happens a lot in research. So I love it, but I hate it, but I love it, That's how I would describe my experience with research.
Do you have kind of a very similar day-to-day, or is it constantly changing? Yeah, I'm sort of curious about what your schedule looks like when you're conducting this kind of research.
So for me, where my project is very field-based, it's very intensive during the growing season and after harvesting and before planting. And then during the cold months, in the winter and stuff, it would be a lot more working inside in the lab, processing samples and just looking at the data, I guess. But yeah, definitely maybe not day to day right now, but certainly season to season or month to month varies quite a bit.
Yeah, for me right now, so I'm doing a lot of my turtle research is something I'm doing part-time alongside this placement I'm doing with the Ocean Bridge Direct Action Program. So my daily schedule varies a lot day to day, but I'm working with the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, doing some data analytics related stuff with them, and then my turtle research on the side as well. So throughout my day, it will be, the main core of it right now is working with the GCSC. And then afterward, it's a lot of my work with the turtles is actually online. I'm working in R, doing a lot of coding and analysis.
And how did you learn R just on the job? How has that process been?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had, again, zero interest in R when I started my degree. Even I didn't really learn it until my fourth year. And I'm really glad I did. I love R now. It makes me feel like a hacker, even though it's very, basic coding. But I really recommend to anybody beginning their environmental career to take a course early on in your degree on how to use R if you have the ability to do that, because it's at U of T, and I think it's kind of a flaw in their program. It's not a mandatory requirement to take any sort of you just have to take a statistics course, which has a lot of information I'll never use again. And they don't have a course specific to R that's mandatory. And that is one of the best tools you can have in your toolkit by the end of your degrees. If you have R, a lot of places that in the environmental sector want you to have some sort of analysis experience. That and ArcGIS, if you can take courses on using both of those throughout your degree, I cannot recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, I didn't take a stats or a programming course in my undergrad, and I regret it almost daily. So if it's available to you in your degree, take it. You will not regret it.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to it's the programs themselves are not necessarily difficult to learn. It's just difficult to find the time to devote to learning them when you're not kind of forced to in an academic setting. And this last summer was when I really had to, hone in and learn it in order to analyze all of the data that I had. And it was a very steep learning curve, but it comes quickly, and I cannot recommend learning R enough.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to learn, but I mean, if you're going into research, you will definitely need it. So it's better to start learning as soon as you can, rather than be like me. And now here I am trying to learn it. And I wish I had more experience.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier when there's deadlines you have to reach.
Yeah. And it's just a frustrating, like coding of any type, I find is just so incredibly frustrating to learn when there's pressure to learn it, because you need it for, like, the analysis of your project. If you can learn it in a learning friendly environment, like a course where they expect you to not know it, it's way nicer. Learn R is the real thesis to all of my advice.
That's amazing. Are there any other big tips you have for people that want to go into environmental research or research in general that you wish you would have known going into your degree? Because that's super helpful. Yeah. Is there anything else that comes to mind? It's okay if nothing else is.
Well, I mean, Dante already touched on this, but yeah, it's really important to read journal articles and really like learn how to read journal articles. I mean, like, not just read from start to finish. Like, you have to actually like look at each of the sections and decide which one is like important. Like if you're looking at a paper that is inspiring you to do your own study, like, you really need to understand like what methods they used for their study, and like, are you able to take these and put them into your own project, and like make sure you understand like what didn't work for them, so that you are aware of this when you are doing your own project as well.
Yeah, just read tons, and talk to people that are actually like established in their environmental careers to some extent too, and ask them questions, kind of like what you're doing with us at our stage of our careers, but asking people that are 10, 20 years established, how did you do this, and what advice do you have? Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you, guys. Would you like to talk a little bit about the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup too, Dante?
Yeah, of course. I would love to. I'm pretty jazzed about this program. So the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup is a program that's sort of part of the Plastic Free Oceans Conservation Initiative of OceanWise. They are a program that advocates for, you can go to their website, sign up for a shoreline or park cleanup in your area or a neighborhood. There are like locations where people have done cleanups before, or you can select a new region if nobody's done a cleanup there. And you schedule a date and time, and you collect garbage, and at the end of it, you submit a data card. So basically, how many items of microplastics did you find? So as I clean up, I, tick the boxes, and then you submit that data afterward, how much it weighs, how long your cleanup was, how many people actually ended up volunteering, and that sort of thing. And it's just a really educational experience doing these cleanups, because you get this very intimate understanding of what ends up being trashed on our shorelines. So yeah, I'm a part of that program. So my role right now is I'm been helping with some communication stuff, helping with their social media to some extent. And then right now I'm building a data project proposal. So I'm really interested in the data side of things. We have, over 30,000 cleanups worth of data, and I want to work with it and try to understand more of what our, waste composition is like across the country. So that's sort of what I'm doing. I'm trying to also learn. This is why I was mentioned ArcGIS. If you I want to use ArcGIS to analyze this data, and I took a course in university which helped me, but I'm still very much a baby with the Arc skills. So yeah, again, take Arc everyone. But yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
Is there anything when you're looking over this data and analyzing it that's shocking to you that makes up our trash, or is there anything that people would be surprised to hear?
I think nobody would be surprised to hear this, but one thing I'm very interested in is that they actually had to add, so like when you see this data card, they have like pre-selected categories that you would add, like, okay, a tick, there's a plastic category, and then you pick a subcategory and tick the boxes based off of how many items you find in that category. We actually had to add a category for PPE, so like masks and gloves. Yeah. And so I'm really interested in the environmental impact of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I think the fact that there's been so many items found related to PPE since the pandemic started that we actually had to add an extra category. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, that's pretty major. Yeah, I'm really curious to hear about what kind of impact the pandemic had, because I live on UBC actually, and even just walking around campus, like you won't go, I don't know, 5 meters without seeing like a couple masks on the ground. So it is pretty.
I know. I was just there. I was in Vancouver for a couple of weeks. I just got back in Toronto on Friday, and I was staying at UBC campus, and you're totally right. You go like for a walk, down to the beach, and it's pretty bad.
And I hope that somehow it balances out because people are traveling less, but I don't know. It is scary.
Yeah, that's a big mood.
I think we've actually, with Youth to See, done some of those cleanups and had little data cards. And
oh, cool.
Yeah, it's been really great experiences. We have one coming up that's Halloween themed, so I'm pretty excited for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Are you dressing up in costumes?
Yes, we are.
Awesome.
I think we're gonna have some like
so funny.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Get some good photos. I think that would be a really hilarious photo opportunity.
We're going to be along the seawall. We'll be picking up trash in our crazy costumes. So it'll be a good photo.
Send photos to the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. You might get featured on their Instagram.
Definitely. Awesome. Yeah, do you guys have any big takeaways, anything else you'd like to say for our listeners, assuming most of them are high school students hoping to have careers in biology or marine biology specifically? Just to close up, I think we've had so many good things you guys have said already, but if there's anything that you're like, oh yes, I needed to say this is your time.
I don't think anything is really coming to mind. No, I think I'm pretty good. How are you feeling, Rachel?
Just to remember that there are so many different streams within the environmental sector, and just because one doesn't pique your interest doesn't mean that the environmental sector isn't for you. There are so many different routes you can take.
Yeah, that's very true. It's super diverse. If you're somebody that likes to, be at home on their computer all day, look into bioinformatics. If you're somebody that wants to do field work, you can do, like, there are environmental jobs specific to just being out in the field all day. If you like a mix of both, there's stuff for you. It's crazy the options that you have available to you. One thing I would recommend is look at, before you really delve deeply into what specific field you want to get into in the environmental sector. First of all, talk to people in different fields. Also look up job requirements in entry-level jobs in the environmental sector to see if they align with your interests, and then you can see which positions you align with, and then from there build your degree skills that you need.
Yeah, kind of work backwards a bit. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's all for today. Thank you both so much for giving your time. It was so appreciated. And
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.